Officer, I have an appointment on the 42nd floor. The receptionist already checked me in.
I understand, sir. We just got a call about an unauthorized individual in the lobby.
I'm authorized. You can confirm with security badges in the system.
I'll do that. Appreciate you.
Officer Daniel Brooks had been wearing a badge for just under 7 years when a single decision inside a downtown office lobby would erase everything he thought that badge protected. Not just his career, not just his reputation, but 8 years of public trust and $6, $8 million of the city's money. At opt patruzech, she doya. M. On a clear Tuesday morning, Brooks responded to what dispatch casually labeled a disturbance at Calderon Plaza, one of the most prestigious commercial buildings in the city. Glass, steel, private elevators, and law firms whose names rarely appeared in headlines because they wrote them. To Brooks, it sounded routine, an unauthorized man refusing to leave. Another problem to remove. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to confirm, was that the man waiting inside that lobby wasn't trespassing. He wasn't loitering. And he wasn't powerless. He was the managing partner of the law firm that occupied 4 entire floors of the building. A man whose signature controlled billion-dollar deals. A man who knew the Constitution better than the people sworn to uphold it. And in less than 3 minutes, without asking a single verifying question, Officer Brooks would handcuff him in front of employees, clients, and cameras. That moment would ignite a legal firestorm, expose a pattern of racial profiling, and end a police career that the system had protected until it couldn't anymore. This is the story of how one assumption destroyed everything. Marcus Reed was 52 years old, and power had long ago stopped being something he needed to announce. It followed him quietly, in the way people lowered their voices when he entered a room, in the way negotiations shifted the moment he spoke. For nearly 3 decades, he had built Calderon and Reed LLP from a modest litigation practice into one of the most influential corporate law firms in the region, representing Fortune 500 companies, advising mergers that reshaped entire markets, and dismantling opposing counsel with calm, surgical precision. He had argued before federal appellate courts, taught constitutional law as a visiting professor, and trained generations of young attorneys who now occupied corner offices across the city. In buildings like Calderon Plaza, men like Marcus Reed weren't questioned. They were expected. That morning was no different. His driver dropped him at the front entrance at 8:40 a.m. Right on schedule. Reed adjusted the cuff of his navy bespoke suit, balanced the familiar weight of his leather briefcase, and stepped toward the revolving doors, already reviewing deposition notes in his mind. There was a multi-billion-dollar corporate dispute waiting upstairs, and time was currency. But just before reaching the turnstiles, a rare, almost mundane realization stopped him. His access card wasn't in his pocket. He checked once, then again, calmly. He had left it on his desk the night before. It was a minor inconvenience. Nothing more. The security staff knew him by name. His office was 4 floors from the top. His assistant sat less than 50 yards away. In a building like this, forgetting a badge was not a crisis, it was a formality. Marcus Reed stepped toward the security desk, fully expecting the problem to be solved in seconds, unaware that this small oversight was about to place him directly in the path of a system that no longer saw who he was, only what it assumed him to be. The problem began not with hostility, but with inexperience. Behind the security desk that morning stood Jason Miller, 27 years old. 3 weeks into the job, his uniform still stiff, his posture rigid in the way of someone clinging tightly to new authority. He had never met Marcus Reed. He had never been briefed on the firm's senior partners. What he had been told, repeatedly, was simple: do not make mistakes in this building. When Reed explained calmly that he had forgotten his access card and asked Miller to contact his executive assistant upstairs. Miller didn't hear a routine request. He heard risk. He saw a man without credentials standing in a high-value environment. And fear, masquerading as professionalism, began steering his judgment. "I can't let anyone through without ID," Miller said. His hand drifting toward the radio, clipped to his chest. Reed nodded. Unbothered. "That's fine," he replied. "I'll call my office. They'll come down." He stepped a few feet to the side, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling through his contacts. The movement was slow, deliberate, entirely non-threatening. But from Miller's perspective, it looked like refusal. It looked like someone ignoring instructions. In that moment, Miller made a choice that would set everything in motion. Instead of verifying, instead of asking a supervisor, instead of waiting 30 seconds for confirmation, he keyed his radio. "I have an unauthorized male refusing to vacate the lobby," Miller reported. After a brief pause, he added the word that would change the trajectory of the morning. "Subject is becoming uncooperative." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. In reality, Marcus Reed stood quietly near the turnstiles, phone in hand, waiting for his assistant to answer. No raised voice, no threats, no aggression. Just a man attempting to access his own workplace. But once those words went out over the radio, the situation was no longer about access cards or misunderstandings. It had been reframed as a problem requiring enforcement, and enforcement was already on its way. Officer Daniel Brooks was less than 2 blocks away when the call came through his radio. Unauthorized male. Refusing to leave. Commercial building. The phrasing was familiar. Almost routine. And in Brooks' mind, the picture formed instantly. He wasn't imagining a senior executive late for a deposition or a managing partner rushing to court. He pictured someone who didn't belong. Someone causing discomfort in a place designed to keep discomfort out. Brooks flicked on his lights just long enough to cut through the intersection, then killed them as he pulled hard against the curb. The tires scraped slightly. A small but deliberate display of urgency and control. Before he even stepped out of the cruiser, he had already decided how this encounter would end. He entered the lobby with his shoulders squared, thumbs hooked into his vest, eyes scanning not for context or explanation, but for confirmation. The space was wide and echoing, marble floors reflecting the morning light and amplifying every footstep. Executives moved around him instinctively, giving space, assuming authority. Brooks barely glanced at the security desk where Miller was gesturing nervously. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't ask who the man was or how long he'd been there. Instead, his gaze locked onto the only black man standing near the turnstiles. Phone in hand. Posture relaxed. That was enough. In Brooks' mind, the situation had already been solved. He had found his subject. The facts, whatever they were, could come later if they mattered at all. Brooks closed the distance in long, deliberate strides, the sound of his boots echoing across the marble floor before his voice did. "Phone down. Step away from the secure area," he ordered. Loud enough for half the lobby to hear. Marcus Reed turned slowly, lowering the phone but not ending the call. His expression wasn't fear or defiance. It was confusion, the look of someone trying to understand why a routine inconvenience had suddenly escalated into a confrontation. "Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding," Reed said evenly. "I work here. I'm the managing partner of Calderon and Reed. I forgot my access card this morning." It was a reasonable explanation. It was calm. It was immediately verifiable. Brooks didn't acknowledge any of it. He stepped closer, invading Reed's personal space. His presence meant to dominate rather than investigate. "I don't care who you say you are." Brooks snapped. "You've been asked to leave, and you're refusing. That makes this trespassing." Around them, movement in the lobby slowed, then stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Couriers paused. A receptionist froze behind her desk. Everyone could feel that something had gone wrong. Reed glanced briefly toward the security desk. Then back at the officer. "No one has verified anything," he said. "My assistant is on her way down. This can be cleared up in seconds." But Brooks had already framed the encounter in his mind. In places like this, people who belonged didn't have police standing over them. And so, to him, Reed could not belong. "Last warning," Brooks said, his voice hardening. "Walk out that door now, or you're leaving in cuffs." In that moment, the truth was standing directly in front of him, and he chose to ignore it. Marcus Reed inhaled slowly, deliberately, the way he had learned to do before cross-examining a hostile witness. He understood something important in that moment. Anger would only validate the narrative already forming in the officer's mind. Precision was his only protection. "I'm going to hand you my business card," Reed said clearly, projecting his movements the way lawyers do when they know they're being watched. "It has my office number. You can verify everything immediately." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "Don't reach," Brooks shouted, his hand dropping instinctively toward his taser. In one sharp motion, he slapped Reed's hand aside. The card slipped free and fluttered to the marble floor, landing face-up cream stock. Embossed lettering. Unmistakably expensive. "I didn't ask for your card," Brooks barked. "I gave you a lawful order. Leave. Now." The lobby went completely silent. People weren't just watching anymore, they were witnessing. A man dressed in a $3,000 suit, speaking calmly, offering verification, was being treated like a volatile criminal. Phones subtly shifted in hands. Eyes widened. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. Reed straightened, his voice no longer conversational. It carried the weight of a courtroom. "Officer, you are making a serious mistake," he said. "I am not trespassing. I am a documented tenant and a principal owner of the firm that occupies this building. If you detain me without probable cause, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure." The words landed hard, and they had the opposite effect they should have. To Brooks, legal language wasn't information, it was provocation. He didn't hear a citizen asserting rights. He heard someone challenging his authority in public. His jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. "You want to talk law," Brooks sneered. "We'll talk downtown." In that instant, the encounter stopped being about security policy or access cards. It became about control. And Brooks was no longer interested in being right, only in winning. "Turn around," Brooks ordered, his voice low and sharp, the tone officers use when they've already decided the outcome. Marcus Reed didn't move. Not out of defiance, but out of principle. He remained facing the officer. Shoulders square. Hands visible. "I am not resisting," he said calmly. "But I am not leaving my own building." That sentence was the point of no return. In Brooks' mind, compliance was submission. Anything short of it was resistance. And resistance, real or imagined, justified force. He stepped forward abruptly, closing the final inches of space, and grabbed Reed by the shoulder. The movement was sudden, unnecessary, violent. Brooks spun the older man around and drove him forward. Reed stumbled, but caught himself only to be shoved again, chest first, into the marble reception desk. The sound of bone-striking stone cracked through the lobby, echoing off the high ceilings. Several people gasped. Someone cried out. "Stop!" A woman's voice shouted. It was Reed's executive assistant, rushing from the elevator, heels skidding on the polished floor. "What are you doing?" "That's Mr. Reed. He owns the firm." Brooks didn't look at her. He was fully committed now. Adrenaline overriding reason. He yanked Reed's right arm behind his back, twisting it upward at a painful angle. "Stop resisting! Stop fighting!" Brooks yelled, words spoken not for the man beneath his hands, but for the witnesses, the cameras, the record he was already constructing. "I am not resisting," Reed said, through clenched teeth, his cheek pressed against the cold marble. "I am complying under duress. Everyone here is a witness." The handcuffs came out. Metal clicked against metal. They closed tight around Reed's wrists, biting into the skin. A finale. Petty assertion of dominance. In that moment, the managing partner of one of the city's most powerful law firms stood restrained in his own lobby while the system congratulated itself for maintaining order. Officer Brooks yanked Marcus Reed upright, the cuffs pulling painfully at his wrists. Reed's tie had shifted. His suit jacket was bunched at the shoulders, but his posture remained controlled. There was no panic in his eyes, only focus and awareness that this moment would matter long after it ended. "Step back!" Brooks barked at the gathering crowd, as if they were the problem. Then he shoved Reed toward the revolving doors. The lobby had transformed from a place of quiet efficiency into a corridor of stunned silence. Junior associates stood frozen near the elevators, mouths slightly open. Clients slowed mid-stride, struggling to reconcile what they were seeing. A man who clearly belonged being paraded out as if he were dangerous. Reed caught the eyes of two young attorneys from his firm. They were fresh out of law school, still believing the system worked the way it was taught. "Call my partner," Reed said evenly as he passed them. "Secure the lobby footage. Preserve everything." Brooks snapped his head around. "You don't get to give orders," he growled, tightening his grip. "You'll talk when I tell you to talk." Outside, the October air was sharp. Brooks shoved Reed toward the patrol car, forcing his head down as he opened the back door. Reed complied without struggle, folding himself into the cramped plastic seat, an indignity far removed from the leather interiors he was accustomed to. As Brooks slammed the door, he felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The scene was over. The call was cleared. In his report, this would read like routine enforcement. Inside the cruiser, Reed sat silently, memorizing details: the time, the route. The badge number reflected faintly on the dashboard. He wasn't afraid. He was already preparing. As the car pulled away from the curb, Brooks didn't realize he wasn't transporting a suspect. He was delivering evidence. The drive to the precinct took less than 10 minutes. Brooks spent it typing rapidly into his dashboard computer, building the narrative as he went: criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, resisting. Each keystroke wasn't documentation. It was insulation. In the back seat, Marcus Reed remained silent. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He noted the time, the turns taken, the sequence of events. Years of litigation had taught him something crucial. The strongest cases are built in moments of forced calm. At the 1st District Precinct, Brooks pulled Reed from the cruiser and marched him through the back entrance, past holding cells and fluorescent-lit hallways that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. This was Brooks' territory. Here, his authority usually went unquestioned. At the booking desk stood the watch commander, Sergeant Luis Alvarez, a 28-year veteran whose face carried the fatigue of someone counting the days to retirement. He barely looked up at first. "What do we have?" Alvarez asked. "Tres passer at Calderon Plaza." Brooks replied casually, dropping Reed's confiscated wallet onto the counter. "Refused to leave. Got mouthy. Claims he owns the place." Alvarez picked up the wallet, opened it, and froze. His eyes moved from the identification to the man standing in handcuffs. Recognition hit him instantly, like a punch to the chest. He had seen that face across a courtroom not long ago, calm, devastating, dismantling the city's case line by line on the evening news. Alvarez looked back at Brooks, his voice lowering. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Brooks shrugged, the confidence already starting to thin. "Some lawyer with an attitude." Alvarez straightened slowly, the air in the room changing. "Unlock the cuffs," he said. What he was resisting, Brooks began. "Now." Alvarez snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "Take the damn cuffs off him." The realization began to seep in, cold and undeniable. Brooks hadn't arrested a trespasser. He had brought a legal earthquake directly into the station. The handcuffs came off with a hollow metallic click that echoed louder than the arrest itself. Marcus Reed rubbed his wrists where red welts were already forming, then calmly adjusted his cufflinks and straightened his jacket. The dignity Brooks had tried to strip from him snapped back into place without a word being spoken. "Sergeant," Reed said evenly, meeting Alvarez's eyes, "I will be filing a formal complaint. I want photographs taken of my injuries, and I want every camera in Calderon Plaza preserved immediately." Alvarez nodded once. He didn't argue. He knew better. Within minutes, the precinct captain appeared, drawn by the raised voices and the sudden shift in command. The atmosphere inside the station changed from routine to crisis. Body camera footage was requested. Incident logs were pulled. Brooks stood off to the side, silent now, watching the narrative he'd tried to build begin to collapse in real time. By early afternoon, the footage confirmed exactly what Reed had described. No aggression, no refusal to cooperate. Only an officer escalating from orders to force without cause. The report Brooks had written unraveled line by line against video that did not lie. The lawsuit was drafted before the day ended and filed by Friday morning. It named Officer Daniel Brooks, the private security firm, and the city itself. False arrest, excessive force, civil rights violations. But the real damage came during discovery. Reed's firm didn't just examine the incident, they examined Brooks. Complaints previously dismissed, patterns ignored, supervisors who signed off on retraining that never happened. By the time the city attorneys finished reviewing the evidence, there was no question left to debate. This case could not go to trial. A courtroom would turn it into a spectacle. A cross-examination would turn it into a disaster. The city settled $6.8 million, and it was only the beginning. The settlement was announced quietly, but its impact was anything but. $6.8 million paid not by Officer Daniel Brooks, but by the city itself. Public money, taxpayer money, the price of a decision made in minutes and defended for years by a system that had chosen comfort over correction. Brooks was placed on administrative leave the same day the settlement became public. 3 months later, after an internal review that could no longer ignore what the cameras had captured, he was terminated. His certification was revoked, effectively ending his ability to work as a police officer anywhere in the state. The badge he had once relied on for authority was now evidence in his personnel file. Jason Miller, The security guard whose radio call had ignited the chain of events was fired as well. The private security firm lost its contract with Calderon Plaza, a deal worth millions annually, and quietly removed its branding from the building within weeks. Marcus Reed, meanwhile, refused to let the story end with a check. After legal fees, he donated the remainder of the settlement to a civil rights defense fund dedicated to representing individuals who had been stopped, searched, or arrested without the power or resources to fight back. People who never make headlines. People whose names aren't recognized at booking desks. At a press conference held outside his firm's offices, Reed stood composed, wrists healed but memory intact. Cameras flashed. Microphones hovered. "I was lucky," he said. "I had lawyers. I had witnesses. I had leverage." Then he paused. And that shouldn't be what it takes to survive an encounter like this. The room went silent. Marcus Reed looked directly into the cameras, his voice steady but unmistakably heavy with truth. "When that officer looked at me," he said, "he didn't see a managing partner. He didn't see decades of work, or the name on the building directory. He saw a stereotype. And if he can do that to me in a suit, in my own office building, imagine what happens to someone in a hoodie on a dark street who has no one to call." That was the heart of the story. Not the arrest, not the money, but the reality that credentials, success, and respectability are often no shield against bias once an assumption has already been made. Officer Brooks didn't fail because he lacked training. He failed because he never paused long enough to see the human being in front of him. And the system failed because it allowed that behavior to continue until it became too expensive to ignore. Stories like this force an uncomfortable question into the open. How many similar encounters never reach a courtroom because the person in cuffs doesn't own a law firm, doesn't know their rights, and doesn't have the resources to fight back? What needs to change to stop officers from making these snap judgments? Should there be personal accountability for misconduct settlements, or does real reform require dismantling a culture that confuses authority with infallibility? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you believe these stories of accountability matter, share this video, because silence is how this keeps happening.